I am a single child, and as other single children out there who are listening, we know how much we rely on our imagination to fill up time, to invent stories in our heads, to while away our time. So, thinking back to my tweens and, the endless afternoons of summer holidays, I was trying to think what really helped fill up the time, fill up the void, and yet keep me very, very entertained. I've always loved romantic stories. And I've loved a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of magic instilled in them. And I think the book that I'm about to read for all of you probably encompassed all of this in the best way possible. My mother introduced me to this author. Her name is Mary Stewart. This book that I'm about to read, called Thornyhold, was not the first of her books that I read. There were others, and I fell in love with them. My grandmother, Dida, as I would call her, bought this book for me later. And it was the sweetest thing that I could ever read. It gave me hope. It filled up certain voids that single children tend to have, I guess. And I'm hoping, if any one of you listen to this, that it will help while away some time for you. Whether it's while you're cooking and you're listening to something in the background, whether you are doodling and you want to have a voice playing in the background, with nothing too jarring, with nothing too hard to listen to. Because, let's face it, a lot of what we're hearing every day is very tragic. It's hard. It's quite hard to digest sometimes. So, here's to Ms. Mary Stewart, bringing a little bit of magic and love to my young years, and hoping it brings a little bit of lovely entertainment for you now. So, as I said, the name of the book is Thornyhold, and the author's name is Mary Stewart. The book cover that I have, it's a nice watercolor version. It just shows, something that you would imagine Elizabeth Bennet's family living in. It's set in England, of course. Mary Stewart was from England. And just shows these little flowers and what would look like herbs growing in the garden. It's got quite a bit of land around it. There looks like dense forests behind it. It gives you an idea of a welcoming but slightly secluded place as well. So, with that, let's begin. Chapter 1. I suppose that my mother could have been a witch, if she had chosen to. But she met my father, who was a rather saintly clergyman, and he cancelled her out. She dwindled from a potential Morgan Le Fay into an English vicar's wife, and ran the parish as one could in those days, more than half a century ago, with an iron hand disguised by no glove at all. She retained her dominance, her vivid personality, a hint of cruelty in her complete lack of sympathy for weakness or incompetence. I had, I think, a hard upbringing, and so, I believe, must she have had. I remember a photograph of my grandmother, her mother, whom I never met, but whose picture terrified me through my childhood. Scraped back hair, piercing eyes, and a lipless mouth. She had lived in the wilds of New Zealand and had shown all the tough virtues of the pioneers of her day. She was a notable nurse and healer, who would have been classed in an earlier day as a wise woman, or even a witch. She looked it. My mother, a handsomer version of her, had the same abilities. Merciless to the healthy, disliking all other women as a matter of principle, indifferent to children and animals, she was nevertheless endlessly patient with small babies, and was a splendid nurse to the sick. A couple of generations earlier, she would have been carrying jellies and soups to the ailing and deserving poor in the parish. But those times were past, and instead, she presided over village working parties and made jams and jellies, which she sold. We need the money, and besides, they don't value anything they get for nothing. And when there was an accident at the pit, she was there, along with my father and the doctor, and as youthful as either. We lived in a bleak, ugly colliery village in the north of England. Our house was well built, but hideous, far too big and very cold. The water was limestone hard and always icy. My mother had never in her youth known hot water laid on, and she saw no reason to waste money by using the damper at the back of the vast, extravagant Eagle Range. If we needed hot water for washing, we boiled it in pans on top of the range. Baths were allowed once a week, 2 inches of warmish, hard water. Coal was expensive, at £1 a ton, but the vicarage and church got their electricity free. So in my small Arctic room at the top of the house, I was sometimes allowed a single bar electric fire to keep the cold at bay. I never remember having hands or feet free from chilblains. This did not count as an ailment, but merely as a weakness, and was ignored. The vicarage lay at one end of the village, isolated beyond the church in its own garden, where my father, aided by the old sexton — I'm a powerful digger, I had to be — spent every hour he could spare from his parish duties. On one side of our ground ran the main road, on the other 3 sides were graveyards. Quiet neighbors, we used to say, they were. I never remember being troubled by the thought of all the bodies buried so near at hand, and our normal shortcut to the village lay through the oldest field of graves. But it was a grim place for a solitary child, and I suppose my childhood was as bleak, as comfortless, and even lonelier than the Brontes' cold upbringing at Haworth. It had not always been so. I had been my own small golden age to look back on, my brief span of dream days that made the real days of childhood bearable.